The signal didn't arrive clean. It rotted its way into the network, crawling through every system like a living thing decaying in slow motion. Every relay station it touched screamed in static before going silent. And then, buried deep inside, the distortion, a voice surfaced weak, trembling, broken by years of distance and damage. We stayed when no one else did. The words repeated, fading, then returning, over and over, until silence consumed them. Across the galaxy, civilizations paused not out of curiosity, but out of something far more dangerous: recognition. That voice shouldn't exist anymore. Earth was gone. A smoldering memory erased from the maps of the stars. The council chamber orbiting the dead star was cold and silent. Hundreds of species were gathered in polished black halls, their faces tense under the dim light. Commander Rhea stepped forward, her ash-gray skin reflecting the dull glow of the chamber. Her people were nearly extinct, survivors of a war the galaxy preferred to forget. A counselor's voice broke the silence, sharp and disbelieving. Why bring this relic here? Rhea's fingers clenched behind her back, her heart heavy with memories no one else seemed to carry. That signal, she said quietly, is from Earth. A ripple of unease spread across the room. Impossible. Another voice snapped. Earth fell to the Varick swarm decades ago. Rhea's eyes burned as she fixed her gaze on the council. Yes, and we were there when it did. The room went still. No one wanted to remember. You disobeyed orders, a voice accused. You doomed your people. Rhea nodded once. Yes, she had. No regrets, only truth. We lost 80% of our population. Our homeworld is ash. Our fleets are gone, but we did not run. The weight of her words pressed down on every species in the chamber. Everyone else had fled. She had stayed. Flashbacks hit her with the force of a planet-wide bombardment. The sky was fire, tearing through cities with organic ships that moved like living predators. Smaller creatures rained down, shredding everything in their path. Humans fought, ferocious and desperate, refusing to acknowledge the word extinction. Her fleet had orders to retreat, to save what remained. But Rhea had looked down at the fragile blue planet, watched the streets burning beneath impossible odds, and made a choice that would cost her everything. No, she had said. We stay. Someone had to stand beside humanity when the galaxy turned its back. Now, years later, the council stared at her, uneasy. Outside, alarms blared, holographic displays flickered and stabilized, revealing a fleet so vast it consumed the space between stars. At first, it seemed impossible, then terrifyingly real. Thousands of ships, massive and angular, moved as one, silent, waiting, watching. The council whispered, disbelief mingling with fear. Rhea stepped closer to the projection, recognizing the design immediately. This was not humanity as it had been. This was humanity as it had learned to survive, evolve, and dominate. A single transmission broke the silence, crystal clear and precise. This is Captain Elias Vorn of the Terran Remnant Fleet. We have returned. No anger, no pleading, no emotion at all, just cold, terrifying efficiency. The council panicked. They'll destroy us. We abandon them. We need to negotiate. Rhea stayed silent. Understanding the truth they refused to accept. They didn't come for revenge, she whispered. They came to settle a debt. Without warning, the first colony vanished. Not an explosion, not a battle, just gone, wiped from existence. Data streams poured in, linking each destruction to a world that had abandoned Earth. Precision, accounting, fear swept through the council as more systems disappeared. The terrifying order of humanity's return becoming painfully clear. Rhea boarded one of the human vessels herself, stepping into a world that was unsettlingly quiet, sterile yet alive. At the center stood Captain Elias Vorn, human, but not as she remembered. His eyes were sharp, colder than steel, carrying the weight of a species that had survived annihilation. You stayed, he said simply. Rhea nodded. Yes. Silence lingered for a heartbeat before he asked the question that struck deeper than any accusation. Why? Searching for the right words. Duty, honor, defiance. She finally said, because someone should have. He studied her, then nodded, an acknowledgement heavier than any metal. The human fleet moved with horrifying efficiency. Entire empires that had once fled Earth crumbled in hours, their leaders helpless before the calculated might of humanity. Yet when the fleet approached Rhea's people, they did not strike. Ships arrived instead, laden with resources, technology, support, recognition. not pity. Elias' voice came over the come, simple and resolute. Debt repaid. Watching another civilization that had fled burn, Rhea finally understood. Humanity didn't seek vengeance. They remembered every betrayal, every act of cowardice, every loyalty. They carried it all, and they acted with precision. There was no mercy for the guilty, no wasted time for hesitation, only the cold, inevitable balance of consequences. In orbit above a world, Rhea stood alone, staring into the black tapestry of stars, each one a reminder of choices made and lives lost. Behind her, Elias' voice echoed, calm but commanding. Tell them what happens when Earth stands alone. She didn't turn, but her heart ached with the weight of truth. I will, she said softly. Then, almost in question, will you stop? Silence answered first, then, finally, the words that would haunt her forever. When the debt is settled. Rhea closed her eyes and let the cold realization wash over her. Some debts can never truly end, and some memories never fade. Humanity remembers, and when it remembers, the galaxy pays. The galaxy had celebrated the death of humanity for decades. Statues had been erected, histories rewritten, songs of victory sung in every star system. Billions believed Earth was gone forever, that its people had been extinguished by the Varick swarm and the failures of their so-called allies. It was the perfect lie. But then the fleets began disappearing. Whole worlds vanished overnight, leaving nothing but echoes in the sensor networks. First it was the outer colonies of species that had abandoned Earth, then capital worlds, strategically placed, where decisions had been made that cost lives. Panic rippled across the galaxy like a tidal wave, but there was no warning, no signal, no mercy. The message arrived later, delivered through every surviving network. Debt acknowledged. Archivist Lumei stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. She had devoted her life to the careful cataloging of Earth's fall, piecing together scraps of communication, propaganda, and half-burned records. Her species had abandoned Earth, like most others, retreating when the swarm descended. And now, she realized, every lie she had told herself, every justification, was about to be stripped bare. The galaxy had misjudged humanity. Worse, they had forgotten that a few had not. She dug through the suppressed archives, her claws trembling as she unearthed images of alien soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder with humans amidst burning cities. Rhea, Talvin, Hale, and others who had defied the orders of their own species, who had stayed behind when survival demanded they flee. They were ghosts, erased from history, their sacrifices hidden to maintain comfortable narratives. Lumei felt a strange mix of awe and guilt, a tightening in her chest that made her claws ache. Humanity remembered. Humanity never forgot. Then the transmissions started. First, small, almost polite, announcing the approach of fleets. Then, with growing confidence, messages delivered in calm, precise tones that chilled every species to its core. Humanity had returned, not with screams or ultimatums, not with fire and chaos, but with the terrifying efficiency of those who had survived everything. And now, they were coming to account for it all. Entire council chambers fell silent when the fleets appeared. Ships unlike anything seen before glided through space, perfectly organized, engines muted, yet radiating presence. There were no proclamations, no hails, just the weight of inevitability. And in that silence, a single thought spread like a virus. They had learned. They had evolved. They were here to reclaim what was owed, and nothing could stop them. Lumei's own species trembled as the first planets to abandon Earth vanished. Not destroyed in open battle, but wiped clean, erased from the maps and sensors. Reports came in one after another, showing that every system that had failed humanity was being accounted for, catalogued, and, when necessary, eliminated. It was not chaos. It was precision. It was terrifying. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, yet couldn't look away. Humanity had returned like a shadow that had finally found the light it needed to strike. Her claws hovered over the interface as she accessed long-forgotten communications. Names, dates, votes, betrayals, all meticulously recorded. Every choice that had abandoned Earth was now on display. Every loyalty and cowardice catalogued. And as she watched, the humans spared those who had stayed behind. Every ally, every species that had risked everything to defend Earth, was untouched, even celebrated. Supplies, ships, technology, they were being returned, delivered as gifts in recognition. Lumei felt tears sting her eyes. Some would call it mercy, but she knew better. It was balance. Humanity did not forgive. They remembered. And their memory was absolute. A human transmission cut through the tense silence of her research station. The voice was calm, clipped, and without warmth. Archivist Lumei, we know what your people did, and what they did not. You will broadcast the truth. Failure is not an option. Her heart raced. It was as if the words pressed against her very bones, forcing her to confront the weight of complicity. The sins of her ancestors, and the ghosts of those who had stayed behind. She had a choice: run, hide, or act. And the consequences of every decision would be immediate, precise, and unavoidable. The first broadcast she made was reluctant, halting. Her voice shook as she recited the names, the actions, the betrayals. She spoke of alien species who abandoned Earth, of those who turned away as cities burned, and of those few who stayed, who gave everything to protect humans when no one else would. Across the galaxy, her words echoed, filling every communication channel, forcing entire species to listen. There were no interruptions, no protests, only stunned silence, and the creeping horror of understanding. As she continued, entire fleets vanished. Star systems fell into darkness, leaving nothing but the hollow void where they had existed. It was as if the galaxy was being rewritten, judged in real time by the very species it had declared extinct. She could hear the collective gasps of civilizations, the frantic hails, the scrambling attempts at negotiation. Humanity did not negotiate. Humanity accounted. Every choice had a consequence. Every betrayal was remembered. In the corridors of power, counselors and leaders tried to maintain composure, but the fear was palpable. They saw their histories unraveling, their carefully curated narratives exposed as lies. Lumei watched, horrified, yet compelled, as the humans approached each system in turn. They did not speak, they did not plead, they did not threaten. They acted, and every action was precise, purposeful, deliberate. The humans were not monsters. They were historians. They were executioners. They were judges with memories that stretched across the stars. Lumei felt her own past and choices weigh heavily on her. Her species had fled. They had abandoned Earth. They had survived by hiding, by erasing the truth, by convincing themselves that humanity was gone and could never return. And now, humanity had returned, and she knew the reckoning would come. She knew that survival alone would not save her. Only accountability, only recognition, only embracing the truth could allow even the smallest chance of mercy. The humans moved with terrifying restraint. They did not destroy indiscriminately. They struck with purpose, sparing the innocent, rewarding the loyal. She watched ships land on devastated planets, repairing cities, restoring infrastructure, offering resources and technology to those who had kept their word, who had stood when all else had fled. Every act, every calculation, reinforced the same chilling truth. Humanity did not forgive. Humanity remembered. And when it remembered, it acted. And yet there was something almost poetic in their precision. A species once mocked as weak, vulnerable, and insignificant had become the ultimate arbiter of cosmic justice. Lumei understood that this was not vengeance in the chaotic sense. It was a ledger, balanced across centuries, meticulously calculated, and ruthlessly enforced. Those who abandoned Earth were erased. Those who stayed were honored. Every action was remembered, every choice accounted for. There was no randomness, no mercy without reason, no fear without justification. As she broadcast the final transmissions, her own voice shaking with exhaustion and awe, Lumei realized that humanity's return was not a spectacle. It was an event that would reshape the galaxy for generations. Entire empires would fall, and those that survived would be forever changed. Every species, every civilization, every individual would know the price of abandonment and the cost of loyalty. And Lumei knew that, despite her own fear, she had a role to play in ensuring that the ledger was complete. For the first time in her life, Lumei felt the weight of history in her claws, not as an observer, not as a chronicler, but as a participant. Humanity had returned to the stars, not as saviors, not as conquerors, but as the ultimate witnesses, remembering everything, punishing what must be punished, rewarding what must be rewarded. The silence that broke across the galaxy was not empty. It was the quiet of accountability. The stillness before the weight of memory was imposed. The calm before every action was measured, and every consequence executed. And in that silence, Lumei understood the truth that would haunt her species forever. The humans they had abandoned, the Earth they had ignored, the choices they had made, they were all remembered. And when humanity remembered, the galaxy changed. There was no escape. There was no hiding. There was only reckoning. And it had begun. The battlefield stretched for miles, a scar across the surface of Earth that still smoked decades later in memory. Ash and fire rose like pillars into the sky, swallowing entire cities in choking clouds. General Hale stood atop the ridge, his armor scorched, his body trembling from exhaustion, yet his gaze never wavered. Around him, alien soldiers fought alongside humans, shoulder to shoulder, their weapons firing in synchronized fury against the relentless onslaught of the Varex swarm. The screams of the dying pierced the air, mingling with the roar of collapsing structures and the deep, thrumming vibrations of alien war machines. Hale felt a pang in his chest at the sight of human civilians scrambling across the burning streets. They were terrified, yes, but they were unbroken. Mara Reyes, a human survivor barely in her teens, ran past him, clutching a child to her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was an unshakable determination there, the same that had carried humanity through centuries of hardship. Hale had watched her dive into danger to save the wounded, shield them with her own body. She reminded him why they had stayed when the rest of the galaxy turned away. He had defied orders, abandoned protocols, even betrayed his own people, and he did not regret a single choice. Because someone had to stay, someone had to bear witness, someone had to fight. The sky shifted as more Varex ships descended, their organic forms writhing with alien intelligence, tearing apart what remained of Earth's defenses. Hale barked orders, coordinating humans and aliens alike, directing the fight in chaotic harmony. Sweat stung his eyes, blood coated his hands, and still he pushed forward. The cost was unimaginable. Fleets were destroyed, allies fell, cities were reduced to ash. Yet, amidst the chaos, Hale never wavered. He knew that even if Earth were lost, their loyalty mattered. Even if no one else remembered, humanity would. Years later, Hale lived in exile on a barren world, stripped of rank, his species branding him a traitor, an outcast for the very choices that had saved countless lives. Mara had grown too, her survival shaping her into a leader among humans. She had never forgotten him, or those who had stood beside Earth when it was abandoned. The memory of burning cities, of smoke-choked skies, and the courage of those who fought haunted Hale every night. And then came the day humanity returned. The first sighting was unmistakable. Fleets of human ships appeared across the systems, vast, silent, and precise. They moved with terrifying order, every vessel in perfect formation, engines muted, yet radiating presence. Whole worlds that had abandoned Earth trembled at the news. Panic spread as communication channels were flooded with human transmissions, calm and unwavering. They were not seeking negotiation or diplomacy. They were not seeking war. They were seeking justice. Hale watched from the observation deck of his exile station as civilizations that had once fled Earth scrambled. Governments collapsed, fleets disbanded, and leaders fled in terror. The humans moved with an efficiency that was almost clinical, striking first at those who had turned their backs, sparing no one, leaving entire systems empty in hours. Hale felt a cold weight settle in his chest. This was not vengeance born of rage. This was calculated memory, a ledger of loyalty and betrayal that stretched across decades. Humanity remembered, and the galaxy was paying. Then came the ships that stopped. They did not advance upon Hale's people. They hovered, massive and imposing, but silent. A single transmission came through, clear and resolute. General Hale, your loyalty has been noted. Your people will not only survive, they will be restored. Resources, fleets, technology will be provided to repair what was lost. He stared at the display, disbelief and relief warring in his chest. After decades of exile, after seeing his sacrifices written off as treason, he realized that humanity had not forgotten him, or the ones who had stayed. Across the galaxy, those who had fled were not so fortunate. Entire civilizations that had abandoned Earth were being brought to their knees. Planets vanished, fleets dissolved into nothingness, leaders disappeared. There was no chaos, only precision. Hale realized then that humanity did not forgive. They balanced scales, measured debts, rewarded loyalty, and punished betrayal. Every action was remembered, every choice accounted for, every life weighed against another. The universe had become a ledger, and humanity was the ultimate arbiter. Hale's mind drifted back to the burning cities of his youth, to the screams and the smoke, to the faces of humans and aliens alike who had chosen to fight rather than flee. He remembered Mara, her courage, her determination, her unwavering belief that Earth was worth saving. That belief had carried him through the worst nights, the darkest hours. And now, as humanity advanced, he realized that their memory had become something far more terrifying and beautiful than mere revenge. It was justice. It was recognition. The first human emissary arrived, stepping from a vessel that dwarfed anything Hale had ever seen. Captain Elias Vorn, familiar from whispers and distant reports, regarded Hale with eyes that carried both weight and understanding. "You stayed," he said simply. Hale nodded, words caught in his throat. "Yes," he finally managed. "We stayed because someone had to, because no one else would." Elias' gaze lingered, a mixture of acknowledgement and something colder, sharper, than Hale had ever felt. "It was noted," he said. "All others who abandoned Earth will face the consequences of their choice." And the consequences began immediately. Reports flooded in entire empires. Destabilized fleets disbanded, leaders vanishing without trace. Systems once powerful and proud now lay empty and silent. Hale could not look away. He had witnessed the galaxy abandon Earth, but now he saw it account for every betrayal. Humanity had become a force beyond mere destruction. They were historians, executioners, and guardians of memory all at once. Yet, in the midst of the fear and awe, there was recognition, restoration. Hale's people received fleets, technology, and supplies. Marias, now a leader among humans, coordinated efforts to rebuild what had been lost. Hale watched as cities rose, as fleets were restored, as hope returned to those who had stood when all else had fled. And he understood, finally, that humanity's return was not vengeance, it was balance. It was the universe settling accounts. Hale's thoughts drifted to those who had betrayed, to those who had fled. Entire civilizations were erased, not in random fury, but in measured precision. There was no chaos, no disorder, only the terrifying inevitability of memory. Humanity did not forget. Humanity did not forgive indiscriminately. They acted, and when they acted, the universe felt it. Hale realized then that survival alone was meaningless without acknowledgement, without loyalty, without standing for what was right even when it meant exile, death, or ruin. As the human fleets moved across the systems, Hale felt a strange relief mingled with awe. The galaxy had been judged, and some species had paid dearly. Others, like his own, were honored. The universe had changed, rewritten by memory and justice, by those who had endured when all else had fled. Mara approached him, her expression a mixture of pride and solemnity. "They remembered," she said softly. "They never forget." Hale nodded, feeling the weight of decades lift slightly from his shoulders. Humanity had returned not as conquerors or saviors, but as witnesses, and their memory was absolute. Watching the stars through the observation deck, Hale allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The fires of Earth were long extinguished, the screams long silenced, yet their echoes had carried across the galaxy, preserved by those who had stayed. And now, the galaxy itself knew what it meant to abandon, to betray, and to honor. Humanity's reckoning was not over, and perhaps it would never be, but for those who had stayed, for those who had fought, for those who had remembered, there was finally recognition, and in that recognition, something that resembled peace. The rubble of the city was still smoldering, blackened stone and twisted metal jutting out at odd angles, a chaotic skeleton of what had been a bustling human settlement. Amid the devastation, a small human child sat on the cracked pavement, tears streaking the dirt on her face. Smoke swirled in the air, carrying the acrid tang of burning wood and scorched metal. She whimpered, shivering against the cold ash that settled like snow around her. And then she saw him, a towering alien soldier, armor scorched and dented, bloodied yet unbowed. He knelt down, extending a hand. "You won't be alone," he whispered, his voice steady even as the world collapsed around them. In that moment, amidst fear and chaos, a promise was made. Years passed, and that child, Cassian Hale, grew into the man who would one day command the most powerful fleet humanity had ever assembled. Every lesson, every scar, every nightmare of that day had been etched into his mind, shaping him into a commander of unmatched precision and resolve. Humanity had survived against all odds, not because the galaxy had lent a hand, but because they refused to surrender. That promise, made in the ruins of a world left behind, had become a driving force, a guiding principle in the man he had become. Cassian's fleet was unlike any seen before, vast, silent, and terrifyingly efficient. Every ship, every crew member, every system was coordinated to act as one entity, a singular will of purpose. The alien species that had once protected him, and others who had remained loyal to humanity during its darkest hours, were now scattered, some enslaved by empires that had abandoned Earth, others struggling to survive on forgotten worlds. Humanity's return was personal for him, a reckoning built upon the foundation of that promise. He observed the first planets under his command with clinical detachment, knowing which systems had abandoned Earth and which had stood by it. Whole civilizations were paralyzed by the sudden arrival of humanity's fleet. Leaders who had once made decisions that cost millions of lives now found themselves at the mercy of the species they had dismissed, mocked, and neglected. And yet, amidst the fear and awe, there was precision. Cassian had not come to destroy indiscriminately. He had come to honor loyalty and exact accountability. Every choice mattered. Every betrayal was remembered. On one of the outer colonies, the enslaved aliens who had once fought beside humans trembled at the sight of Cassian's fleet descending. Their masters had long forgotten the cost of abandonment, indulging in exploitation and oppression without consequence. Now, as the humans landed with overwhelming power, the aliens realized that their oppressors were about to pay for the sins of their species. Cassian moved with terrifying restraint, dismantling command structures, freeing the oppressed, delivering justice without unnecessary destruction. His decisions were measured, each action a reflection of the promise made decades earlier in the ruins of his childhood home. The human fleet advanced like a shadow across the stars, silent but inexorable. Planets that had abandoned Earth were the first to feel the consequences. Entire governments collapsed within hours, fleets evaporated under precise strikes, and leaders vanished, removed from the equation without chaos or indiscriminate carnage. Cassian's focus, however, was always on balance. For every empire that fell, every betrayer that was punished, every act of loyalty was acknowledged. Resources, ships, and protection were delivered to those who had stood beside humanity when the galaxy had turned its back. Within the liberated systems, the aliens who had remained steadfast were wary at first. Decades of neglect, oppression, and exploitation had taught them that aid often carried strings. But as Cassian met with them, personally, the reality became undeniable. Humanity had returned not as conquerors or oppressors, but as guardians of a promise. Each gesture, each gift, each strategic deployment of resources was a calculated acknowledgement of sacrifice and loyalty. Cassian reminded them, quietly, but unmistakably, that their endurance had not been forgotten. The galaxy's reaction was a mix of fear and awe. Some species attempted to negotiate, sending emissaries with pleas for mercy, arguments for survival, and bribes meant to sway the humans. Cassian listened without emotion, responding only when necessary, his voice calm, clipped, and unwavering. "Your choices have consequences," he said, almost like a teacher correcting a wayward student. "You abandoned Earth. You failed humanity. And now, you will account for that failure." Entire empires quaked at his words, understanding immediately that negotiation was futile. Only recognition or obliteration awaited them. At the same time, the aliens who had stayed behind watched with a mixture of relief and wonder. Cassian visited them personally, meeting with their leaders, understanding their losses, their sacrifices, and their endurance. "You kept your word," he said. "You stood when others fled. That has not been forgotten." Technology, supplies, and protection were delivered to rebuild what had been lost. Unlike those who betrayed, they were not erased. They were elevated, strengthened, and acknowledged. Cassian understood that true justice was not blind destruction, but balanced the restoration of what had been lost and the measurement of what had been forsaken. As the human fleet moved through the galaxy, Cassian's mind drifted back to the promise in the rubble of his childhood. He remembered the alien soldier who had knelt before him, offering protection and hope amidst despair. That memory was the foundation of his resolve, the guide for every action, every calculation, every strike and every gift delivered. Humanity had returned not out of vengeance or hatred, but because the debt of loyalty demanded repayment. And he, more than anyone, embodied that principle. In the corridors of power, on liberated planets, Cassian's reputation grew, not as a conqueror, but as a custodian of justice. Entire civilizations began to understand the terrifying logic of memory and accountability. Actions were recorded, choices were remembered, and every being across the galaxy learned that abandonment carried consequences while loyalty earned recognition. Humanity's return had rewritten the rules of engagement, not with fear alone, but with clarity, precision, and an unyielding moral code. The climax arrived quietly, but with undeniable impact. On a world that had once enslaved the species who had protected humanity, Cassian's fleet struck. The oppressors were dismantled methodically, their power structures erased without unnecessary bloodshed. The liberated aliens were offered leadership, resources, and the chance to rebuild their societies. As Cassian observed the transformation, he felt the weight of that childhood promise settle fully upon him. The galaxy had learned that loyalty was not forgotten, that promises mattered, and that those who stood with humanity would be honored in ways that the betrayers could never comprehend. Cassian watched the stars. His fleet dispersed across the galaxy, enforcing the balance of accountability. The humans had returned, not as destroyers, not as saviors, but as keepers of a promise carved into war. And as he considered the lives restored, the debts collected, and the justice delivered, he realized that the promise from his childhood, whisper amidst the smoke and ash, the vow that he would never be alone, had become the principle guiding an entire species. Humanity remembered. Humanity acted. And when it did, the universe was forever changed. Senator Velka had grown old in a galaxy that had forgotten Earth. A world erased from official histories, erased from the collective memory of the Council, erased from their consciences. The lines on his face were deeper than most, etched with regret and sleepless nights, his hands trembling despite the control he fought to maintain. He had been one of the few who had opposed abandoning Earth during the Varric Swarm's invasion, who had argued for assistance when fleets pulled away, when votes favored retreat and survival over morality. Yet here he sat, a relic in a council that had moved on, a galaxy that had chosen convenience over courage. He remembered the debates, the protests, the desperate pleas that had been ignored or silenced. He remembered watching as fleets of other species departed, leaving Earth to burn beneath the relentless onslaught. And he remembered those who had stayed humans fighting alongside a few brave alien allies. Faces etched with determination, bodies worn and broken but spirits unyielding. He had voted for them, yes, but what had it mattered when the majority chose to look away? The memory gnawed at him, a constant ache, a reminder that moral courage often died in the halls of politics. And then they came. At first, it was subtle. Fleets appearing on sensors where no one expected them. Ships moving in formation that spoke of discipline beyond imagination. The outer colonies trembled. Leaders whispered of impossibilities. Then the messages arrived calm, measured, unyielding. Humanity had returned. They did not announce themselves with threats or war cries. They returned with a purpose that immediately unsettled the Council. Accountability. Every system that had abandoned Earth, every vote, every betrayal, had been recorded. And now, every action had consequences. Velka watched from the observation deck as a projection of the human fleet appeared, stretching across the stars like a river of steel and fire. Ships moved with terrifying precision, engines muted, weapons hidden, but poised. Entire civilizations faltered under the weight of their presence. One by one, planets that had abandoned Earth vanished, not in chaotic destruction, but in careful, deliberate execution of justice. Data flooded the Council chambers as reports arrived from across the galaxy. Fleets evaporated, leaders disappeared, communication networks severed. Humanity did not negotiate. Humanity did not forgive indiscriminately. Humanity remembered. Velka's species, though guilty of inaction, was not yet erased. The humans were deliberate in their approach, forcing the Council and every civilization to confront the consequences of their choices before any physical destruction occurred. Public broadcasts illuminated every betrayal, every act of cowardice, every instance where a vote or a decision had cost lives. Velka felt his chest tighten, realizing the weight of each action he had once debated. Humanity had not forgotten, and the galaxy was finally being forced to remember as well. He recalled the days leading to Earth's fall, meetings filled with heated arguments, speeches for survival, pleas to do the right thing. The majority had voted against intervention, arguing practicality, resource conservation, self-preservation. Velka had been alone, a single voice drowned in the clamor of convenience. Now, decades later, he watched the consequences unfold. Every choice that had abandoned Earth was being accounted for, every failure exposed before the galaxy. Humanity was not interested in chaos. They demanded reflection, recognition, and accountability. Leaders scrambled in panic as the truth spread. Planets that had once considered themselves untouchable were now forced to confront their guilt. Broadcasts detailed which leaders had abandoned Earth, which systems had voted for retreat, which fleets had withdrawn when human and allied forces needed them most. The revelations were public, undeniable, inescapable. Velka could see the terror in the eyes of his colleagues, the desperation as history, carefully edited for comfort, unraveled before their very senses. Humanity had returned as both judge and historian, and there was no escaping either role. Velka tried to speak, to argue, to reason. Surely they will stop after some demonstration, he muttered to himself, voice trembling. But deep inside, he knew better. He had seen what loyalty had earned, and he had seen what abandonment demanded. Every system that had remained steadfast was spared, resupplied, even strengthened. Entire fleets were returned to the aliens who had stood when others had fled. Technology, provisions, knowledge, gifts of acknowledgement, not charity, not pity. Humanity did not forgive. They honored. Meanwhile, the council's chambers were filled with panic and chaos. Holographic displays flickered with real-time updates. Systems disappearing, fleets immobilized, leaders vanishing, and across it all, Velka felt a profound sense of dread. The humans approached methodically, enforcing justice not through overwhelming violence alone, but by exposing truth. They demanded the galaxy confronts itself, forcing acknowledgement before action. Entire civilizations collapsed under the weight of historical accountability, their leaders paralyzed, their citizens bewildered. Humanity was not a conqueror. Humanity was memory made flesh, and memory was relentless. Velka remembered the few who had stayed behind during Earth's darkest days. Those aliens who had defied their orders, who had fought alongside humans in impossible odds, who had sacrificed everything without hope of reward. They were the exception, the rare cases of courage and loyalty that had been remembered. Humanity did not erase them. Ships arrived with aid, supplies, and technology, restoring what had been lost. Justice was not blind. It was calculated, deliberate, precise, and it elevated the deserving while punishing the negligent. As he watched the events unfold across the galaxy, Velka could not escape the moral weight pressing on him. Every decision he had once made, every compromise, every vote to abandon, now counted against him and his species. There was no hiding. There was no negotiation. There was only recognition. And where recognition failed, consequences were swift. Leaders fell, empires crumbled, and history itself was rewritten not by committees or scholars, but by the very species whose survival they had so callously ignored. Velka felt tears sting his eyes, though he struggled to hide them behind the mask of decorum required of a senator. Humanity had returned, not with rage alone, not with indiscriminate destruction, but with a terrifying precision born from centuries of struggle, endurance, and memory. They acted as both reckoners and custodians, ensuring that loyalty was rewarded, betrayal punished, and history acknowledged. He had spent decades trying to avoid guilt, trying to convince himself that survival was justification enough. Now, he could no longer deny the truth. Humanity remembered everything. The humans moved through the systems methodically, giving the galaxy no chance to escape responsibility. Those who had abandoned Earth faced immediate consequences, while those who had stayed or acted honorably received resources, protection, and recognition. Velka realized that the human fleet was not just a military force. It was a living testament to memory and justice. Entire planets understood that loyalty was meaningful, that actions mattered, that every decision carried weight across decades and late. Humanity's reckoning was deliberate, inevitable, and total. Velka's species, and every species watching, learned the most dangerous truth. Survival alone did not absolve guilt. History, choice, and morality were intertwined, and when humanity remembered, the universe was forced to reckon. The galaxy trembled, not out of fear alone, but out of awareness, understanding, and shame. Entire empires collapsed as they faced public exposure, their betrayals broadcast across the stars. Humanity's return reshaped not only the political landscape, but the moral framework of civilization. Velka sat in silence as the humans approached, their ships gliding silently, their movements deliberate and controlled. The weight of history pressed upon him. Leaders who had once considered themselves untouchable cowered as the ledger of choices unfolded before them. Humanity did not act in rage, they acted in balance. And Velka understood, finally, the cost of looking away. The cost of abandoning those who needed help. The cost of failing to stand for what was right, when no one else would. In the end, the galaxy was quieter, more cautious, more aware of the consequences of every decision. Velka, though burdened with guilt, felt a strange sense of clarity. Humanity's reckoning was not complete, and perhaps it never would be, but the message was clear. Actions were remembered, betrayals punished, loyalty rewarded, and the galaxy would never again be allowed to forget the world it had abandoned. Humanity had returned, and when it remembered, the stars themselves trembled. The recording played again, looping endlessly across the galaxy. A battlefield long silent came alive in fragments of sound and vision. Humans and aliens standing shoulder to shoulder, weapons blazing. Screams of the fallen swallowed by the roar of engines and the thunder of artillery. The sky above Earth was blackened with smoke, illuminated by flashes of fire and energy blasts. Pilot Zero Ven sat alone in her cockpit aboard a reconnaissance vessel, staring at the replay with wide, unblinking eyes. Her fingers hovered over the controls, but she did not move. This was not a recording she had seen before. It felt alive. She traced the faces of the alien soldiers, tall and angular, their armor scarred and dented, yet resolute in the midst of chaos. Their eyes burned with determination, unwavering even as the swarm advanced relentlessly. Then she saw her own species among them, small, fragile humans, moving with reckless courage, holding positions impossible to hold, saving others with nothing but ingenuity and sheer willpower. The footage was a mirror of her ancestors' courage, a testament to loyalty and sacrifice that the rest of the galaxy had long chosen to forget. Syrah's pulse quickened as she realized the truth. She was the descendant of one of the few species who had stayed behind to defend Earth. Her family's role had been hidden, erased from histories, buried beneath official records that painted her people as indifferent or complicit. Yet here, it was laid bare in raw, unfiltered reality. Humanity had remembered. The echoes of the last stand were not just recordings, they were a ledger, a living account of loyalty and courage across centuries. The galaxy trembled quietly as human fleets appeared, moving with silent precision. They did not announce themselves with fanfare. They did not engage in grand displays of conquest. Entire worlds that had abandoned Earth were paralyzed, leaders scrambling to understand the sudden appearance of a force that dwarfed their fleets, yet moved in calm, coordinated formation. Humanity had returned, and the message was simple. Actions have consequences, loyalty is rewarded, betrayal is punished, and memory is absolute. Syrah watched as the humans began their reckoning. Planets once thought untouchable vanished from sensors, not in chaotic destruction, but as a result of deliberate, calculated strikes. Entire empires that had fled Earth crumbled with terrifying efficiency. The humans spared no one who had betrayed, yet showed restraint where loyalty had been proven. Supplies, ships, technology, and protection were delivered to those who had stood with humanity when the galaxy had turned its back. Every move, every decision, every strike carried the weight of centuries of observation, cataloging, and judgment. Her people, fearful at first, prepared for the worst. Generations of oppression, fear, and neglect had taught them that a human presence meant imminent destruction. And yet, when the first humans landed, they offered aid instead of annihilation. The message was clear: you were not forgotten. Relief mingled with awe as they realized that humanity's memory was selective but absolute. Those who had stayed, who had fought and sacrificed, were acknowledged and strengthened. Those who had abandoned, betrayed, or fled, faced swift and calculated consequences. Humanity did not forgive indiscriminately. It balanced the scales. Syrah's fingers trembled as she activated the communications interface, reaching out to the humans. A calm, measured voice responded instantly. Pilot Zero Ven, we have accounted for your species' role. Loyalty and sacrifice have not gone unnoticed. You will be supported, not destroyed. Her heart pounded as she processed the weight of those words. They were not promises. They were not empty gestures. They were a recognition that her ancestors' courage mattered, that history had finally remembered them, and that humanity's return was more than vengeance. Cliffstad was balanced up. As she navigated the vast fleet of human ships, Syrah observed the consequences for those who had abandoned Earth. Entire systems disappeared. Leaders erased from existence. Fleets disbanded without a single shot fired in open battle. Humanity's approach was surgical, precise, and terrifying in its inevitability. No one escaped, and no one could plead ignorance. Every choice, Every betrayal, every act of cowardice had been recorded, remembered, and would now be accounted for. Yet amidst the fear and awe, there was hope for those who had acted with honor. Resources and technology were delivered, damaged. Worlds were restored, fleets were rebuilt, and oppressed species were freed. Humanity's reckoning was not mindless destruction. It was justice tempered by recognition. Ciro felt a strange mixture of relief and pride. Her people had endured, had stood when others fled, and now they were being acknowledged, elevated, strengthened. Humanity's memory was absolute, but it was not blind. Loyalty mattered, and courage was remembered. The galaxy watched in tense silence as human fleets moved systematically across the stars. Reports came in. Leaders who had abandoned Earth tried to negotiate, plead and bribe, but humanity's judgment was unyielding. There was no room for excuses. Actions had consequences. Betrayals were punished. The echoes of the last stand were no longer distant history, they were active reality, reshaping the political and moral landscape of the galaxy in real time. Every system, every fleet, every leader learned that survival alone could not erase guilt. Memory was eternal. Ciro's eyes remained fixed on the holographic projections, watching as human forces rebuilt and reinforced worlds where loyalty had been proven. The contrast was stark. Those who betrayed were eliminated or humbled, stripped of power and influence. Those who had stayed were recognized, rewarded, and strengthened. Entire civilizations were being rewritten, their histories exposed, their moral failures laid bare. Humanity's return was not vengeance alone. It was balance, a cosmic reckoning that reshaped the galaxy according to a ledger of loyalty and betrayal. As she prepared to meet the humans in person, Ciro felt the weight of history on her shoulders. Every step she took was guided by the knowledge that humanity remembered, that memory was active, that past actions could not be erased. The human leaders she encountered were calm, precise, and unyielding. They were not monsters. They were custodians of accountability, carrying out a judgment refined over centuries, informed by observation, and tempered by principle. Every interaction was deliberate, measured, and purposeful. When she finally faced the humans, the impact was immediate. Their presence was overwhelming, yet restrained, a paradox of terrifying efficiency and meticulous acknowledgement. You and your people stood when others fled. One voice said, clear and calm, that has not been forgotten. You will be supported, not destroyed. Ciro felt tears sting her eyes. The past, once a source of fear and uncertainty, was finally recognized. Humanity's return was not merely about punishment, it was about honor, memory, and balance. In the days that followed, Ciro watched the galaxy change. Fleets that had abandoned Earth vanished, worlds that had betrayed collapse, and those who had acted with loyalty were strengthened, rebuilt, and empowered. Humanity's reckoning was total, yet precise, reshaping the moral and political order. Across light years of space, the echoes of the last stand were no longer distant memories. They were living proof that actions mattered, that loyalty was rewarded, and that betrayal carried consequences that could never be escaped. Ciro understood then the full scope of what humanity had become. They were more than survivors. They were historians, judges, and enforcers of memory. The galaxy trembled not merely from fear, but from understanding. The past could not be denied. Actions could not be ignored, and the price of betrayal was exact and unrelenting. Humanity's memory was alive, and its reach was total. As she gazed at the stars, Ciro felt the echoes of her ancestors' courage resonate through her. The battlefields of Earth, the smoke and fire, the bravery and sacrifice, all of it mattered. Humanity had returned, not as conquerors, not as destroyers, but as witnesses, remembering everything, enforcing balance, and reshaping the galaxy according to the truth of loyalty and betrayal. And in that realization, Ciro felt something she had never expected: hope, clarity, and a sense of purpose that spanned generations. The recording looped once more, but now it was different. She no longer saw mere images of destruction and struggle. She saw testament, memory, and justice. Humanity's reckoning had begun, and the echoes of the last stand had become a living force that would change the galaxy forever. A soft, mechanical hum filled the observation chamber as the AI began its broadcast. A voice calm, monotone, and chillingly precise. Names, actions, choices, recorded and preserved. On the screen before him, billions of names scrolled endlessly, each tagged with the deeds of their species, their leaders, and their citizens during the fall of Earth. Tarian stared at the list, his chest tightening, claws trembling as he scrolled past names he recognized, and those he wished he didn't. His species had fled. They had abandoned Earth, retreating when survival demanded it, leaving countless humans and allies to die. And now, the consequences were coming. He could feel it in the silence outside the chamber. Planets that had once held power, systems that had flourished unchecked, now held their breath. They knew the AI's broadcast was more than a message. It was an unblinking ledger of accountability, a cosmic record of every betrayal, and every loyalty. Tarian swallowed hard, the weight of guilt pressing on him like a physical force. Every decision made by his species, every vote to abandon, every retreat, everything was being remembered, catalogued, and now addressed across the galaxy. Fleets of humans appeared. They did not descend with fanfare or the screaming of vengeance. Their ships moved like shadows across the void, massive, silent, precise. They did not attack indiscriminately, nor did they negotiate. Each move was calculated, each strike deliberate, each action a reflection of the memory carried across decades of war, survival, and observation. The humans had returned, and they carried the weight of remembrance like a weapon. Tarian could see fear in the eyes of other alien leaders. Some who had thought themselves untouchable, some who had laughed at the notion that humans could ever rise again. The humans did not speak immediately, but their presence was unmistakable. The message was clear. Every choice mattered. Every act of betrayal would be accounted for, and every loyalty would be rewarded. The galaxy had underestimated humanity once, and that mistake would not be repeated. The first systems to fall were those that had abandoned Earth without hesitation. Entire fleets vanished, communication networks dissolved, and governments crumbled under the weight of precision strikes. It was not chaos. It was execution, measured and methodical. No one escaped. Tarian watched as leaders tried to plead, to negotiate, to hide behind excuses, but the humans were unmoved. Actions had consequences. Betrayals would be punished. The ledger of memory was absolute, and yet not all who faced the humans perished. For those who had stayed, who had sacrificed, who had fought alongside humans when all else fled, there was recognition. Ships arrived, supplies were delivered, fleets restored, and entire worlds were stabilized. Loyalty had a tangible reward. Terran species had not earned this reward. They had fled, they had abandoned. And now, under the unblinking scrutiny of humanity, they feared the full weight of the reckoning. The AI's voice continued, listing every name, every act, every decision. Tarian's own name appeared alongside a record of inaction, a catalogue of cowardice. He felt bile rise in his throat as he read the cold, calculated facts. The humans had tracked everything. Every vote, every retreat, every decision not to help. They had remembered it all. There was no ambiguity, no chance for denial. History had been preserved, and now it was being enforced. When the human emissaries finally arrived, the effect was instantaneous. Ships descended upon worlds like silent guardians, massive and overwhelming, yet with an eerie restraint. Tarian watched as they moved through systems, enforcing consequences without unnecessary destruction, punishing betrayal, and honoring loyalty. His species cowered, unprepared for the precision and inevitability of justice. They had imagined humans, weak, disorganized, or defeated. They had been wrong. Humanity was not only alive, it had become something far beyond comprehension, tempered by memory and purpose. Tarian could hear the subtle hum of the AI as it relayed more names, the endless stream of history connecting billions of lives. Every betrayal was catalogued, every loyal act preserved. The humans approached with a terrifying calm, ensuring that the consequences of the past were manifest in the present. Tarian realized, with a pang of guilt that pierced deeper than fear, that survival alone could no longer absolve him. The universe itself had become a ledger, and humanity was the enforcer of its balance. Worlds that had once oppressed others, or abandoned their allies, were stripped of fleets and leaders. Their histories exposed publicly, broadcasting every choice to the galaxy. Fear rippled outward from each system, spreading faster than any fleet could travel. The humans did not celebrate. They did not gloat. They acted with the precision of historians, executioners, and judges, ensuring that every choice had a measurable impact. Tarian's people quaked, knowing that their own actions or lack thereof had placed them squarely in the path of this judgment. Amid the terror, there were moments of relief and redemption. species that had remained loyal, that had risked everything for humanity, were strengthened, rebuilt, and empowered. Tarian observed the humans interacting with these species, distributing resources, repairing worlds, and restoring fleets. It was a meticulous balance of reward and punishment, a living ledger brought into action. Humanity remembered, and they acted with absolute consistency. Loyalty was recognized. Betrayal was erased. Tarian's own fate hung in the balance as he faced the human emissaries. Their presence was calm, precise, and overwhelming. Tarian, one voice said, steady and unyielding. Your choices have been recorded. You fled when others stayed. You abandoned Earth. The consequences are now unavoidable. He nodded, a bitter acknowledgement of the truth. There was no argument, no negotiation, no plea for mercy that would sway them. Humanity's memory was deliberate and total. Every action, every omission, had meaning. As the human fleets advanced, entire civilizations realized the absolute precision of this reckoning. Those who had fled were punished. Those who had stayed were rewarded. No one escaped the ledger. Terran felt the full weight of history pressing down upon him, an unrelenting reminder that actions carry consequences, that loyalty matters, and that memory is absolute. Humanity had returned not as destroyers, but as enforcers of a cosmic moral balance, and they left nothing to chance. Terran's heart pounded as he watched entire empires vanish from senses, leaders disappear, and fleets evaporate. There was no panic in the humans, only meticulous, unyielding efficiency. They acted as memory incarnate, a living judgment upon the galaxy, enforcing the principle that every choice had weight. Tarian understood the terrifying truth. Humanity had evolved beyond mere survival. They were witnesses, judges, and executioners, all at once. And yet, amidst the fear and guilt, Terran glimpsed a strange clarity. Those who had acted honorably, those who had stayed, those who had risked everything, were being elevated, restored, and strengthened. Humanity did not punish indiscriminately. They rewarded loyalty, protected the courageous, and ensured that history itself reflected the truth of sacrifice. Even in terror, there was order. Even in judgment, there was recognition. As the AI's broadcast continued, Terran's gaze lingered on the names of the honored, the courageous, the loyal. For the first time, he felt the weight of history as something tangible, not merely as regret, but as principle. Humanity's return had become an unblinking ledger of consequence and reward, reshaping the moral and political order of the galaxy. Actions had meaning, betrayals had costs, loyalty had value, and Tarian, though he had fled, could not escape the truth of what humanity remembered. The final transmission looped once more, relentless and unyielding. The list of names scrolled across the stars, a reminder that no act, no choice, no betrayal, no loyalty was ever truly forgotten. Tarian understood fully that survival without honor meant nothing. Humanity's reckoning was total, deliberate, and absolute. And in that realization, the galaxy learned the same terrifying truth. They remembered everything, and when they did, consequences followed. The alien fleet trembled as it hovered in the void, a desperate formation of ships holding their ground against a threat they barely understood. Commander Elias gripped the edge of her command console, eyes scanning the dark expanse of space ahead. Sensors picked up nothing at first. No approaching fleets, no energy signatures beyond their own, but then a faint shimmer appeared at the edge of the system. It grew steadily, a pulse in the void that spoke of power, precision, and inevitability. Her crew whispered in fear. Entire civilizations had learned to avoid engagement with humans long ago. But the galaxy had thought them scattered, weakened, broken. Elias had spent years watching the consequences of their past inaction. They were here. Humanity had answered the call not for negotiation, not for alliance, but for reckoning. The first human vessels emerged from the darkness, massive and silent, engines radiating a barely perceptible hum that reverberated through the alien fleet. They did not open fire immediately. They did not send demands or threats. Their formation alone was enough. Elias's heart pounded as she realized the humans had arrived with overwhelming power but also with terrifying restraint. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, precise. The fleet's communication channels crackled with human voices, calm and unyielding. "We are aware of your actions," one voice said. "We are here to ensure accountability. Choose wisely." Elias's crew panicked, some readying weapons in desperation, others trembling at the enormity of what they faced. She knew that fleeing was futile, that resistance without understanding would lead to annihilation. The humans were not here to negotiate. They were here to test the galaxy. Across the command deck, Elias saw alien leaders sweat under pressure. Each decision they had made during Earth's fall, every choice to retreat or remain silent, was under scrutiny. Humanity had tracked it all. Every act of cowardice or loyalty mattered. The humans had returned, not for revenge alone, but to see which species could stand together, and which would falter under the weight of accountability. The first shots came only after hesitation. Precision strikes dismantling the ships of those who had failed when it mattered most. Others who had acted honorably, who had risked themselves to aid Earth or its allies, were untouched, protected by the humans' overwhelming presence. Elias watched, torn between awe and fear. The galaxy's mistakes were being corrected, but not without an exacting moral standard. Humanity's return was not random, it was a measured test of integrity, courage, and loyalty. Elias took a deep breath as her senses registered the humans moving past her fleet, assessing, observing, waiting for signs of weakness or cooperation. Some species stepped forward, offering aid and alignment with the humans' moral code. Others fled, scrambling in panic. The final judgment would reshape the galaxy forever. Elias realized that history was no longer static. Humanity remembered, and the universe would be forced to answer for its choices. The silence that followed was heavier than any battle. Humanity did not celebrate, did not gloat. They simply waited, and the galaxy held its breath.